We are here to bring multilateralism back from the brink.
That was UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres Sunday at UN headquarters in New York at the opening of the UN Summit of the Future, which opens this week's general debate among the heads of state of most of the UN's 193 member nations. He pointed towards what he called an urgent need for deep reforms in the global institutions that need to address 21st century challenges effectively.
I called for this summit to consider deep reforms to make global institutions more legitimate, fair and effective based on the values of the UN Charter. I called for this summit because 21st century challenges require 21st century solutions, frameworks that are networked and inclusive and that draw on the expertise of all of humanity.
On Monday, the Secretary's spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, detailed one of several catastrophic conditions facing the world in his daily press conference at UN headquarters.
I can tell you that the Secretary General is indeed alarmed by the escalating situation along the Blue Line. He's very concerned about the large number of civilian casualties being reported by the Lebanese authorities, as well as the thousands of displaced persons amidst the most intense exchange of fire across the Blue Line since October of last year. He expresses grave concern for the safety of civilians, both in southern Lebanon and in northern Israel, as well as the UN staff in those areas. The Secretary General notes the ongoing efforts by the UN Special Coordinator for Lebanon and the UN Peacekeeping Force in Lebanon to reduce tensions, and he reiterates the urgent need for de-escalation and that all efforts should be devoted to a diplomatic solution. Our Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, is currently in Israel, where she's meeting with the Israeli authorities as we speak to discuss the latest situation. Meanwhile, the head of the peacekeeping mission, Lieutenant General Aroldo Lazzaro, has been in contact with both Lebanese and Israeli parties, emphasizing the urgent need for de-escalation. Efforts are ongoing to reduce tensions and halt the shelling. The message for both the Special Coordinator and the head of the UN Peacekeeping Force is the same, which is that there is no military solution that will make either side safer. With the well-being of civilians on both sides of the Blue Line and the stability of the region at stake, space must be given for diplomatic efforts to succeed. All involved parties in this conflict must honor their responsibilities to protect civilians and ensure the safety and security of all UN personnel and assets. The Secretary General urges all parties to recommit to the full implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701 and immediately return to a cessation of hostilities and to restore stability. We do expect a more official statement to be issued at some point. On the humanitarian front, our humanitarian coordinator for Lebanon, Imran Riza, met with the Lebanese government officials today, including the Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, and the Minister of Environment, Nasser Yassin. Our humanitarian agencies and others also participated in those discussions. At these talks, the Lebanese government announced the activation of an emergency operation center and also that schools are to be designated as shelters. The Ministry of Education in Lebanon has announced the closure of all public and private schools for tomorrow. Many people are being displaced from areas impacted by the airstrike, with a heavy traffic reported towards Beirut and Mount Lebanon regions. Also on the Israeli side, during the weekend and following an uptick of hostilities, the Israeli military's home command announced that schools in northern Israel, which run from Sunday to Friday, have been closed until at least today at 6 p.m. local time. Humanitarian organizations urgently need some $50 million to pre-position more basic needs, such as food, shelter, and supplies, as an immediate response for the next 2 days to 4 weeks in southern Lebanon and Lebanon in general. Our colleagues at OCHA tell us that according to the Lebanese Ministry of Public Health, more than 274 people have been killed and at least 700 injured, including women and children, following the continued airstrikes in southern Lebanon. Moving to the occupied Palestinian territory, the principles of the Interagency Standing Committee, which brings together the heads of UN humanitarian agency, humanitarian systems, and other and large international NGOs, today sent out a joint message renewing their demand for an end to the appalling human suffering and humanitarian catastrophe ongoing in Gaza. They mourn the loss of innocent lives everywhere, including those killed in Israel on October 7th and during the 11th month of the conflict in Gaza since then. They also urgently call for a sustained, immediate, and unconditional ceasefire. This is the only way to end the suffering of civilians and save lives. All hostages and all those arbitrarily detained must be released immediately and unconditionally. The UN's humanitarian heads said that they cannot do their jobs in the face of overwhelming need and ongoing violence. They warned that more than 2 million Palestinians are without protection, food, water, sanitation, shelter, healthcare, education, electricity, and fuel, the basic necessities to survive. The risk of famine persists, with 2.1 million residents still in urgent need of food and livelihood assistance as humanitarian access remains restricted. They also reasserted that civilians must be protected and their essential needs must be met. There must be accountability for serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. From the ground on Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that ongoing bombardments and hostilities continue to put civilian lives in danger. Between Saturday and today, 3 schools were hit by airstrikes, reportedly killing dozens of people. Women and children were among the fatalities. Many Palestinians were also injured, including children who required amputations. The UN Relief and Works Agency said in a social media post over the weekend that schools have been turned into rubble or overcrowded place for refuge. Displaced families are living in fear. Meanwhile, efforts are underway to establish temporary learning spaces for children. As of 15 September, education partners had established more than 2,000 learning spaces across the Gaza Strip, which aim to reach about 33,000 children, which is only 5% of school-aged children in Gaza. On the health front, our humanitarian partners warn that the health situation continues to worsen, with only 17 out of 36 hospitals remaining functioning, but all partially functioning. The situation is also dire for primary health care facilities. Just 57 out of 132 primary healthcare facilities are functional amid crippling shortages of fuel, medicine, and essential supplies. Meanwhile, OCHA tells us that access constraints continue to severely undermine the delivery of essential humanitarian assistance and services across Gaza. So far in September, 45% of coordinated humanitarian movements in Gaza were denied or impeded by Israeli authorities. Movements are particularly restricted between the south and the north, as it requires crossing through Israeli checkpoints. There, 87% of movements have been denied or impeded. Only 5% have been facilitated, and the rest were canceled. Once again, we want to underscore that humanitarian operations in Gaza must be fully facilitated, and we must have unimpeded access for our humanitarian goods. Turning to Syria, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that on September 20th, a 4-year-old child and an off-duty health worker were killed following artillery shelling in eastern Idlib. 2 women and 6 children, all under the age of 12, were also injured. The UN Deputy Regional Humanitarian Coordinator for Syria, David Carden, called for the cessation of attacks on civilians. Ongoing hostilities in Syria are deepening humanitarian needs at a time when our appeal for response efforts across the country remain highly underfunded. The 2024 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan just received 26% of the $4.1 billion that we need. That means that only just over $1 billion is actually in the bank. This has led to the lack of funding, the fact that it is only about 26% funded, means that we've had to suspend health and water services and other critical assistance.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.